Incoming opposition leader Peter Dutton says the coalition may not support the Albanese government's climate change policies. Joining me live is Bill Shorten's former advisor, Steve Michelson. Steve, welcome to the program. If this is true, is it going to matter as the Prime Minister heads to a majority government and a large group of sympathetic teal independents and Greens?
Well, good morning, Tim. It's great to be with you. I think this time last week I was down here in the southeast suburbs of Melbourne setting up a polling booth, so it's nice to be in the comfort of my own home. On the question of climate change and Dutton's comments, I actually don't think it's going to matter for Labor in the first instance, insofar as them reaching 77 seats in a majority. That's good for the country. It also means that the role of the teals is obviously lessened. They'll still have a carry on in the media. That's predictable. But where the action will really happen is in the Senate. And I think that Labor will have to navigate that incredibly carefully. And I think that could become quite disruptive.
How do you think things will change when Peter Dutton comes in? We've already seen these comments from Tanya Plibersek and Anthony Albanese having to get involved.
Look, I think things will change. I think there's a couple of things here to unpack. Firstly, Peter Dutton, and while Tanya's comments were silly, she made the correction very quickly. Albo obviously positioned on that appropriately very quickly as well. But the real story about that incident is how Peter Dutton is going to frame himself as opposition leader. Part of that is about image. Part of it, though, is about policy. And I think that one thing that Labor shouldn't underestimate is that next week when Peter Dutton does become opposition leader, it will start to be held to account for its policy positions. And, you know, invariably there's a honeymoon period for any incoming government, whether they're the blue team or the red team. But after a while, you know, that ongoing pressure from any opposition does start to bite. And invariably also, government is large, it's complex, and things start to go wrong. So in the first instance, not much will change, but certainly over the coming weeks and months, we will see the shine start to come off Albo's victory last Saturday.
A lot of people in the Liberal Party and the National Party, for that matter, are unhappy with Scott Morrison, the way he conducted himself, particularly over the last 12 months and the campaign. What did you make of it?
I think Scott Morrison did his best. I think that invariably, once Labor had successfully taken the paint off him and in particular instilled a sense of distrust in the minds of the Australian public, ScoMo really had nowhere to go. And all he could do was to get out there and try and be the better retail politician, washing hair, tackling school kids, you know, all of these things that politicians do to try and cut through. And I think ultimately, you know, Scott Morrison's term, like all Prime Ministers, will be remembered as one that had its highlights and also had its lowlights. But the one thing that we've got to call out here is that extraordinary news that came through late this week around the PM's office requesting Border Force to release information about the asylum seeker boat from Sri Lanka, clearly with a view to politicising that issue on election day. And the reason why I'm calling that out is because, you know, invariably it's one piece of information among many, but I do think that does put a bit of a taint on his legacy.
And the government has immediately stepped in on a number of things, including allowing the Billa family to go home.
Absolutely. And I think that's the right thing to do. It's something that Labor clearly committed to doing during the campaign. Also, let's remember that it's something that Labor wants to do at this stage in the political cycle. That shine is on Labor. We don't have Peter Dutton in yet as opposition leader. So it is a good time to fulfil that promise before Peter Dutton becomes leader. And again, it's absolutely the right thing to do. This family has languished for too long, and we can absolutely balance humanitarianism with remaining tough on our borders.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And our thoughts are with them. They've been through a very difficult time. Now, there's almost an immediate change in foreign policy language, and Penny Wong already is clocking up the miles through the Pacific. We've seen Emmanuel Macron reach out to Anthony Albanese. What do you make of Australia's foreign policy going forward and the change of language?
Well, I think we've got to welcome it, don't we? I mean, in addition to the examples you just provided in relation to the Pacific, in relation to Macron, we've also seen Albanese attend a very successful Quad summit, and very good to see that the US-Australia alliance has been, I think, not just reaffirmed but strengthened. It was very clear that he had a very warm engagement with President Biden, also the leaders of Japan and India. So I think we are going to see a significant shift in the foreign policy narrative from this government, and I think that's a good thing, because I think, unfortunately, the Morrison government, and again, being very desperate ultimately, sought to fold foreign policy into domestic politics, and I think that's a mistake. I think the other thing is that we've only just seen the beginning of a Labor administration that is incredibly experienced. I mean, what we are seeing here is a front bench who have not only been in government before, but who have frankly had almost a decade in opposition and have had plenty of time to think about how they will conduct themselves once they have been able to reform government. So I think it's actually also really exciting, because we've got a lot of domestic economic pressures at the moment. So hopefully some of this work in our region and around foreign affairs will start to open up additional economic opportunities as well.
Final question, and I really appreciate you coming on the program this morning, getting up early for us, Steve, is looking overseas and looking at this awful tragedy in Texas, paralleled by an NRA conference. We just saw Senator Ted Cruz and some of his language. I think people watching our program this morning would be absolutely up in arms about what they're seeing. I was on air the day Port Arthur happened, and we saw what John Howard brought in.
Absolutely. I mean, there's not a lot that I agree with John Howard on, I think, politically, but I've got to say the way in which he led that reform following the Port Arthur massacre was extraordinary. And I think, every Australian understands that and they appreciate it. And when we think about our Australian society, we think about the role of guns. What is going on in the US from a policy perspective is extraordinary. And then you add in the political factors that you're speaking of, in terms of, President Biden attending a memorial on the same day that Ted Cruz and former President Trump are attending an NRA conference. And we really, it's bizarre. I mean, I don't know what else we can do. But what I do hope is that somehow the United States decision makers, from both sides of the aisle, because let's remember that the progressives, some of the Democrats take fundraising money from the NRA as much as the Republicans. But I hope somehow they can see sense in what Australia did and what John Howard did, and take a leaf out of our book to make their community safer than what it is now, and see an end to just these terrible, terrible incidences.
Yeah, it's a brilliant legacy of John Howard, to be honest. Steve, look, good to chat. Love to get you on again.
Good on you. Thanks, Tim. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, mate.